Welcome to another episode of the Architects of Destiny podcast. In this episode, Damascena Tanis will be talking to us. Damascena Tanis is an archetypal astrologer, Ayurvedic wellness practitioner, and the facilitator of the transformative journey through the Mandala of Venus cycle called Sky Dancer. As an expert observer and decoder of the cosmos, Damascena shares with us the bigger picture of planetary level shifts that correspond to evolution of human consciousness. This conversation will offer you valuable perspectives on global events, both current and future, and open your eyes to how the macrocosm of collective archetypes is reflected in our daily lives.
Welcome to this episode of the Architects of Destiny podcast with our special guest, Damascena Tanis, who is a very unusual astrologer, not like many because Damascena is a pro when it comes to archetypes, and she very often diagnoses the state on our collective and paints a bigger picture of not just us here and now, but how it connects to our roots and also what's to come in the future. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
I want to start by speaking about astrology and archetypal astrology in general. How is that different to what perhaps people associate with astrology, like usually? Because what you do is very specific.
Yes. So astrology, the different types of astrology is a lot like how the medical system is set up. Astrology, no matter what specialty you study, you can study it from now until at the end of this lifetime, and there'll be more to learn. And so it's helpful for astrologers to choose an area that they want to focus on because it's just such a vast field. And so some astrologers practice what's called modern astrology, and that's really focused on like our outer personality. Traditional astrology is around predicting events, and they have a lot of really unique techniques as well. I focus on archetypes. Archetypes are something that was invented or really came to the fore during Jung's years, and so he saw them as part of the collective unconscious, like these groupings of patterns. And I like to think of archetypes as story vessels. So they're like characters in a movie, hold an archetype. So Wonder Woman has a specific archetype. And so each planet in the pantheon of the stars that we use in this solar system holds a specific archetypal energy. And I have found it to be extraordinarily accurate. And so when I'm looking at the collective, what I'm doing is kind of trying to translate or diagnose the unconscious patterns that are happening in the background that we're maybe not aware of. And it's extraordinarily helpful to ground us into reality. I mean, I see archetypes as a very grounding force because they point to something specific that we all have in our psyche. Like Jung's theory was everyone was born with a collective set of archetypes already pre-programmed or pre-wired into their psyche. So we all understand what the archetype of the mother is, or the father is, or the grandfather is. We come into the world like that. And so instead of being really ungrounded, and especially in the times we're in right now, there's so much shifting and moving so fast that when we can point to the archetypal themes, I personally think it helps us stay more embodied rather than grasping onto kind of thought forms that just kind of pass through the collective and pull us further outside of our body. And that can leave us kind of at risk of being taken away by things that are untrue. And so that I think that's a beautiful way to describe how I personally approach my astrology practice.
That's incredible. And I feel like your insights into the collective are just so incredibly profound as well as accurate. This is the power of the archetype, right? Because it's like, it's great. And by you kind of pointing out what different archetypes mean in the context of the current events, it's almost like you bringing those collective unconscious themes into our consciousness. Is that how you see your role?
That's how I see my role, as a translator of the unconscious and a decoder of the cosmos. You know, there really is a definitive link. You know, the more you live in relationship to the sky story, the more you can feel the palpable link of the as above and so below, the macrocosm and the microcosm, and how they are constantly mirroring each other, and we're in a dance with them. And so when you realize that the influences are real, it becomes almost like an imperative or a duty to translate them for other people. That it becomes like a sacred, I guess duty is the best word, but there's this way that I feel like I think we all do when we have a channeling gift. Like there's something to share that's important to our evolution. And I'm feeling it really strongly. And I know a lot of astrologers are. It's not just me. I think we've all since 2020 been super activated. And even before 2020, we were waiting for this Pluto Saturn conjunction to happen, because we knew something huge was going to take place that year. A lot of people thought because Mars was going to go retrograde that we might have World War III. And so everyone was just waiting. So it's not just me. It's the people who have the gift to interpret the stars are all really wanting to help ground us in to the sky story, so that we understand it's a necessary evolutionary process and there's nothing to be afraid of, versus that ungrounded sense of there's just chaos and I'm scared, so it feels like a duty.
So basically, by telling the sky story, as you beautifully describe it, you are helping the collective to understand the bigger picture. So it doesn't seem as random. And
yes,
it's almost like, well, it's all there in the sky. It makes perfect sense, right?
Yes, absolutely. It's a perfect way of explaining it. Like currently we have Mars and Pluto together in Capricorn, the sign of government. And right now we do. So it's not a long transit. It lasts about 2 weeks, but we're also, at the time of recording this, just on the threshold of that invasion in the East. And so Mars is the god of war and Pluto is the god of the underworld. Pluto's also at the degree of the USA return. And so it tells us that we're going into an underworld portal, and war is the vehicle that's taking us there. But when we go with Pluto, there's something more. There's some truth that's going to be revealed. Pluto is a planet of evolution. And so he takes us down and in and helps us to transform whatever's toxic. He's a detoxifier. He's a purger. And so he wants to help us clear out whatever is unhealthy, which is an uncomfortable process, but it's necessary. It's part of the pruning process for the next steps in evolution. And so this is a super uncomfortable time. It feels like clashing in the body. The sensation of it is, it feels dark. Yeah, like the feeling. We're talking about the sensation in the body. When these energies meet, it can feel like a violent underworld inside of our system or in the field itself. And so imagine not knowing that's what was happening in the collective and just going about your day and having just this sense of maybe impending doom or feeling like the world's turning over and it's scary. that's where the archetypal astrology is really helpful, and understanding what the archetypes do when they get together, like when they make pairings, how they behave, and the energy they cause.
That's a beautiful explanation, because a lot of people sometimes feel this, but don't know where it's coming from. So I often hear people say, well, I feel something in my body, or I feel this sense of anxiety. Like we're recording on the 4th of March, and with the war happening in Ukraine, I've got a lot of friends in Eastern Europe, because I'm Polish originally, and I know that like not even people who are directly affected in that area, but also people who are in America or Australia, felt like this overwhelming sense of anxiety, or something along the lines of, I don't understand what's going on. Why am I being so affected? Is it because we all connected as a planet into this archetypal, well, theater, if you, for lack of a better word?
Yes, well, absolutely. And if we think about the way that Jung described archetypes, he would often, since we're on a podcast, I have to describe it well. He would often draw a picture of, imagine like a kiddie pool, a pool where you put your child in the summertime. So, and then he would put like bowling pins, the pins for the bowling ball. So under the water, you have the bowling pins, and then they're sticking out the top. So at the top, it's us, where we don't appear to be connected at all. But under the water, we're all connected to these archetypes. So there's this interconnected web of the collective unconscious that's being toned by the archetypes. And so there's no time when the planets are not affecting us all together. And the more we respond, and what I've been noticing lately is the collective has been sensitized to the archetypes. There's something happening where in the last 2 to 3 years, I've seen like an intuitive connection between people and the archetypes in a way I hadn't seen before. Like they're really responding. Rory Duff, I don't know if you know who he is. He's a gentleman that studies the ley lines of the earth. So where the water underneath the earth is. He's been studying a long time the way the universe or the planet changes due to where we are in the precession of the equinoxes, or where we are in relation to the turning of the ages. So that's something your listeners may not have heard of before. Essentially, what that means is that every 26,000 years, the Earth has its own year. So we travel throughout the universe or the solar system one time, and that's like Earth's or the solar system's year, to put it that way. And as we're traveling, we go through denser energies and more light energies. And there's a photon belt at some point within the universe's traveling. I'm losing my words, sorry. And that he thinks, his theory is that we're beginning to hit this photon belt now. He thought around 2012 was when that began. We're getting closer and closer. And so things are speeding up and the frequency is getting higher and our density is getting a little bit lighter. And for me, I see that as possibly true in the way that I'm seeing the kind of pure or the clearer connection that people are having to the sky story. So it's being acted out in a very clear way instead of there being like gunk in the channels. And this is with people who aren't even aware that they're doing that. And so it's now I see that astrology is becoming a more and more valid science in the broader collective because it's so accurate and people can sense it, that it's accurate.
Yeah, it's like astrology has proven itself, because I I'm sure there's a lot of our listeners who may not be perhaps following astrology as such. However, they feel the shift in the collective consciousness. We sometimes refer to it as a popcorn effect, where more and more people are awakening that there is more than just those five senses, and people becoming more, I would say, spiritual, but not in a way like we've known it. When it's like a religious spirituality, it's more they're becoming more aware. More aware of the bigger picture of our connection with the universe, with different star systems, and it's happening. And definitely what you're saying about the photonic energies being stronger and this acceleration, well, I feel like a lot of our listeners would have witnessed that in their life, where their manifestations are becoming faster when they think something and it's materializing. It's almost like this veil between the immaterial, metaphysical, and physical is becoming thinner and thinner. And it's like this speeding up, and we can almost feel this speeding up. So my question is, where is it leading to? Because sometimes we refer to this acceleration as the ascension window for the planet, for all of us, raising our consciousness. But of course, the whole universe runs in cycles. So what's beyond that cycle, and how is it? Are we just at the beginning of the cycle? How do you see it in relation to what's going on in the stars and planets?
So let me give a little disclaimer before I go into the astrology part. So I think that one thing that I see happening is that people are, quote unquote, waking up, and that word is a little bit been hijacked. And so waking up to like the truth or the narratives that are down here on the planet that are being played out between, let's say, governments or shadow governments or whatever, that's like one level of awakening, but it's not true awakening. True awakening is actually like inner gnosis, like cleaning out your own channels, turning inward, tending to your own soul. It's helpful to know the truth or to have the understanding of like the bigger picture of the narratives, but it's not enough for us to evolve. For us to really, truly evolve, we all have to come in and do our inner work as well. And so whenever we hear the word awakening, I want to preface it by saying, yes, let's wake up to the truth. That's important, but it's not grounded if we haven't done our soul work. And there are a lot of different kinds of soul work. I believe there's a lot of different kinds of soul families on the planet. And you'll be called to whatever type of soul work is a match for your frequency. And so it's not like someone has to do my kind of soul work. My kind of soul work is very grounded and embodied and a little bit about shadows and darkness. And that doesn't call to a lot of people. A lot of people want to look for ascension or light or transcendental. And so, we all have a way of tapping into the work we need to be doing that's going to aid evolution, but we need to be doing that work, whatever it is for us. So
I totally understand that. And I feel like most of our listeners are on the awakening scale of their own awakening, the ascension awakening, not the type of awakening where I see the systems of powers and control for what they are, because that's like, I feel like there's the two parallel dimensions. So a lot of people who see the narratives, like you say, or the systems of control and power, they still haven't done their own homework because they're still getting just angry at it or feeling powerless. Whereas the other side of awakening is realizing I'm the creator of my own universe, and I've got my own job to do. As you said, there's so many different modalities. Some people work with plant medicine. Some people work with, like myself and my husband, with the Akashic records or with galactic energies. Pick and choose, but yes, I feel like this audience understands the second kind of awakening.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and not that I didn't think they did, but I think it's an important it's just an important thing to put on the dashboard of our awareness, because during these times right now, when there is so much convoluted, inverted information, it's easy to get ungrounded. And then it's always helpful to ask, like myself, is this me awakening into my soul, or me awakening into like, just disclosures and stuff like that. That's why I mentioned it. I believe your audience.
I'm really happy you're actually making this distinction, because I've been thinking about this distinction many times when I hear the word awakening, or waking up, and it's really good that you're actually putting it into words. So I'm really, really grateful for making this, almost like defining it. It's super, super helpful, because it also helps us understand that perhaps, I know, some people are on various, alternative media or Telegram groups, and there's a lot of the disclosure type of awakening, but there's also a lot of people in those groups that don't want to take their own soul journey. So there is that. And conversely, there's people who are awakening to their own truth, who are not even interested in the disclosure, who are not interested in the bigger picture, because they're just interested in their own soul evolution. So there's an interesting interplay between these different types of awakening, and I'm really, really happy you brought that up.
Yeah, and we can do both, and we should do both. It's there's a paradox there, the ability to hold the both, and like to do the soul awakening and hold the curiosity of what's really happening, because we're human. And that's another part of the awakening community that can be, it can be a little prickly. There's corners where it's almost like some places want to leave their bodies, and we need to remember that we're human as well. So the human story matters. It still matters, on top of, whatever soul work we're doing for our own ascension or our own embodiment. What's happening in the collective is still important. And so we need to be able to hold both lightly, in paradox. As for the turning or the cycles that we're in, with astrology, there's always cycles upon cycles. Time in astrology isn't linear. So a lot of times when we're doing forecasting, we're looking back at what was happening like 84 years ago when Uranus was in Taurus last time, or the last time Pluto was in Capricorn, or the last time we thought the age was turning. And so we're definitely in the portal, I think, of the turning from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius. I think that we've been in that portal since about the 1960s. It's a phase. It's not like a year. It's not like 1 year happens and then all of a sudden we've crossed the threshold. There's this kind of like phasing in and phasing out journey that happens, and then it's complete. And I think that there are many astrologers or people who study the precession who have different theories about when that will be complete. My lineage tends to think that we're in like the pre-phase of that, and then at 2025 we'll have gone into the we're definitively making a transition out to the age of Aquarius.
That's really interesting. You mentioned that day 2025, because my husband, who always puts his over the horizon consciousness radar to see what's going on in the collective, who's totally not in trained in astrology. He just gets it from the quantum field. Always says that 2024 is like when that new earth is starting to take shape, and 25 is already getting better, whereas now it seems like we're in this dark night of the soul collectively. Does that feel like that for you too?
Oh, and that's the astrology as well. It's absolutely the astrology. So like I said, the United States is having its Pluto return, and I don't want to have a lot of hubris and say that should matter for the whole globe, but I think it does, because they've got their tentacles in everything, the United States. And so I think there is this way that the Pluto return is going to cause a huge underworld journey for the inhabitants of the United States. And then everything this country touches is going to go through a kind of dark night of the soul. And it's not really going to begin to let up until that 2024 date, maybe even 2025. Also, Uranus is one of my favorite planets. He's the planet of like shock and awe and liberation and individuation. His archetype is not actually Uranus, it's Prometheus. So Prometheus was the mythic archetype that gave the fire of the gods to the people. So he gave the people the ability to live on their own without the help of the gods. They gave them like the spark of life. It's an incredible story. And so everywhere he touches, he's revolutionizing that area. But he can act a little bit in the way that Pluto does, where, he cracks open to and causes some destruction in order to create the transformation. And he is in Taurus right now. And the last time he was in Taurus is when the United States had the Great Depression. And so we're in another cycle where Taurus is the sign that deals with resources and finances, our values, our attachments. It's a Venus ruled sign. So everything that Venus rules is kind of getting a once over by Uranus. And we see what's happening in the financial sector now and with Bitcoin. And so it'll be interesting to see, if we have another crash. I hope not. But if we've put some systems in place that will help mediate that. But I think it can be a really great thing for decentralizing some of the power that these central banks have. And so it's another place where I see a huge evolution possible. It's really exciting, but it probably won't happen without some pain. And unfortunately, that's the way evolution always seems to go. It's like you're in the womb and then the birth canal is just really uncomfortable, before the birth.
That's a beautiful, beautiful way of looking at it. And thank you for actually showing us this perspective, because one of the other episodes of this podcast is actually about the new wealth for the new earth. It's about the quantum financial system, and decentralization. So we see all these themes playing out, and you just linking them so beautifully to a bigger picture with archetypal astrology. What else do you see in the collective for the next couple of years? Where do you see humanity going, really? What challenges have we got to navigate until we perhaps see the dawning of this new age?
This episode is brought to you by the Quantum Club. The Quantum Club is a membership program designed to help you develop your spiritual abilities, such as connecting to your galactic soul family as guides, speaking light languages, channeling, transmitting and receiving light technology. Every week we hold live sessions and work with you energetically on a deep level to unlock your divine intuitive gifts, to connect deeper than ever before with your higher self and galactic light beings. To find out more, head to bit.ly/galactic club. That's bit.ly/galactic club. See you there.
So I think that what we're going to have to do is begin to grapple with our relationship to polarity and duality, and the idea of what balance is. I was speaking on another podcast the other day and talking about how in the spiritual community, like when you first step in, you hear the word balance a lot. And it's this, I think it evokes this idea of static dark and light, or static, weighing of the scales. You have an equal amount of this and this. And that's not the mystical understanding of what balance is at all. And in fact, I think it's that idea can pull us further out of balance. So balance really is that idea of holding the tension of the opposites as they begin to resolve themselves. It's the kind of balance that you'd have as you walked over a really rocky field and you're trying to keep your balance as you go. It's this ability to stay really supple and not get rigid around your ideas. And we've seen in at least in my country, an extraordinary level of polarization, where people just are almost living in two different realities. And the opposites are getting more and more stark, like of thoughts, of there just seems to be an acceleration in like not being able to resolve anything by partnership or by dialogue. And we're going to have to grapple with that in order to move forward. So I see that on the horizon is this a need to dialogue, a need to come back into center and figure out where that is for each of us and balance from that place, like move from this place where the tension is supple. We won't make much progress if we stay in these polarized camps. And that I'm seeing that. And then I'm seeing a lot of, there's a lot of activation right now between Mars and Venus. This is currently right now. The cycle of Mars and Venus has changed in the last few decades. They used to make more contact with each other. And it went on for thousands of years. They had this cycle where they'd meet 3 times. And then all of a sudden that cycle changed in the last few decades to where they were only meeting twice. And we're seeing that present in the way that men and women are relating to each other, and the divorce rates are higher in these last few decades. And so there's this way that I think that the actual relationship between men and women has become, we just have lost the ability to relate in an intimate way that is positive or fruitful at all. There's a lot of distorted thinking in partnership, ideas around women's sovereignty and empowerment are not allowing them to partner in a successful way. Men's ideas around masculinity and their own type of sovereignty is not allowing them to partner in a successful way. So together we're navigating a new way. I mean, this is a new paradigm of men and women relating because the cycle itself has changed. And so it's not about there being an old way to go back to. It's about finding the new way together to relate successfully so that partnerships are healthier and more fruitful. Yeah.
This is super interesting about the male and female thing. If you allow me, can I just ask a little bit more about this? Because a lot of spiritual community associate going into this age of Aquarius with the divine union, that we've had the matriarchy, which the history of matriarchy has been wiped out, so we don't know really much about it. We know all about patriarchy because we still in it. Do you see us collectively moving to this age of partnership, the divine union, where we can co-create, or is it not yet? Do you see there's a lot more that needs to happen before we can kind of relate between genders in a more, like you say, fruitful way?
Yeah, I think that we're still in the balancing phase. I think that the feminine element is just now coming online. And so I still think we live in a very patriarchal dominator kind of paradigm. So we're not talking about men in particular. It's just the kind of paradigm we're in, or the action. It's very Mars-like. And Venus hasn't really had an opportunity quite yet to elevate herself to the level where those two are equal. So I don't see exactly how divine union can happen until the Venusian energy is more stable and rooted on the planet. But it's certainly possible in human beings who have done that work themselves to have that kind of union. So on a personal level, absolutely. But I do think we will first go through this period of balancing the Venusian energies and really holding her up as a true partner versus that being something that's resentfully given to her by society. I still think we're in that portal. I don't feel like we're quite to the point yet where we really hold her up as a sovereign half yet.
You actually work with the Venus energy a lot, with the Venus cycle. It's one of your passions, right? To work with the cycle of Venus. Can you tell us a little bit more about what Venus can teach us? Because there's another thing that I see a lot, and especially, when we talk about the awakening of the divine feminine, is that almost like when we think of the awakening of the divine feminine, we only see certain archetypes of the feminine coming alive. So I see in the spiritual community, again, the goddess archetype is alive, the lover archetype, yes, but there's certain ones that it's almost like, the sage woman, the huntress, we're not finding it. And the same with the masculine, where we glorify the warrior, maybe the father, but then there's other kind of male archetypes that we completely not even seeing them as masculine, the same way as certain feminine archetypes. We're thinking that maybe it's not feminine unless you this kind of like lover. But when you look at Venus or the goddesses of love in the ancient history, whether it was Venus or I know that you relate, you retold beautifully the story of Inanna. That was the same. It was usually a goddess of love, but also of war and of creation. It's almost like we stripped those goddesses from the different aspects, and we kind of boxed them into this just love and sweetness, but they weren't like that, right?
Yes. Well, that's part of what my passion for reviving the Venus cycle and having her be the container from which we view the stars. For me, it's a reclamation. And so it's part of my personal passion to go. So there's the archetypes, and they're really helpful when we want to point to something. But when we are embodying the cosmos, so like bringing heaven down to earth and wanting to really use the stars as a tool on our spiritual path. So different than just reading a horoscope or wanting some direction. But for me, it's like your own spiritual path is yours. For me, the stars are really something that's part of my spiritual toolkit. The archetypes can be limiting because there are only a few to pick from. And so this is another place where we have to do the both and the Venus cycle allows us to do that because her cycle is it's so multivalent. She takes on so many different emanations during her cycle. She's either high in the sky and then on her way down to the underworld, and then very far away from the earth, so we can see her as the dark goddess, or a goddess not associated with any light because she's on the other side of the sun, so we can't see her. And then we can associate her with underworld themes because she's not visible. And then we can associate her with transcendent energy because on the other side of that she comes up. So we've got kind of the pantheon of immanence, and then we've got the all of the different archetypes of ascendants to work with. And it would be a long conversation to give them all to you, but I feel like in working with this cycle, we're actually stepping beyond the archetypes and we're accessing the greater energy of just what the feminine herself is. And the feminine force of reality is that kind of the force of gravity or centripetal force. It's very strong. It's the force of nature, force of hurricanes. We're able to tap into something much bigger than just the archetypes with the Venus cycle, which is why I like it. I love paradox. And so it's a place where I can apply both and play with two things are true at once.
Thank you so much for explaining that. I want to wrap up by asking you about perhaps someone who's listening to this conversation is fascinated by the whole idea of archetypes and astrology, where can we find you? And also, what advice would you offer to people who are perhaps a bit curious and want to explore it for themselves?
So you can find me. My website is redmoonrevival.org, and I'm sure that Rita will put it in that. Yeah, they'll get a link. But archetypal astrology is there are several books. My mentor, my teacher who I apprenticed with, Ren Butler, he's written quite a few books that are very helpful. One of them is a cookbook style book. So if you wanted to get a chart and just begin looking up the aspects, that book is a great guide. It's very easy to use. It's called the Archetypal Cosmos, I believe. Yes, by Ren Butler. And then Richard Tarnas is considered to be the father of archetypal astrology, and he has a wonderful website that's got a lot of resources on it for anybody who's interested in just beginning to look at what that is. What is archetypal astrology?
Okay, so I'm going to ask one more question. I know that this is usually the question people ask at the start, but since you like paradoxes, let's ask it at the end. How did your journey evolve? Because perhaps again, someone is listening, thinking, "Oh my goodness me, it's so interesting. It's superb. Where do I start? Because this is such a complex art. It's going to take a lifetime to study." How did you get started with actually? Because it's quite technical as well as you know, just knowledge of different archetypes, and how would you kind of guide someone on that journey of discovery? What's the kind of things that you used to do when you were first starting?
So I think my story is a lot like other people's. I hear stories like this a lot. When I was first able to go to the library when I was like 12 on my own, I would go and take out Jung's books. I don't know why I was interested in him. I was adopted, and so I think I always wanted to try and figure out who I was because it was a closed adoption. So I didn't have any of my own sense of history. And so astrology for me has been a way to know who I am, you know, bigger than the kind of mystery of really who am I. And then the first books I bought as a teenager were tarot books and astrology books, and I was really interested in learning about it, but it is, like you said, a very complex system, and I didn't have a teacher at the time to help me crack some of the charts. The charts are difficult to look at. I then went on to study Ayurveda, and in the Ayurveda, they use astrology as a diagnostic tool. And I was like, oh my God, the first time I was introduced to like, in a school setting, somebody that might be able to help me make sense of the astrology. And so I did that a little bit, but then I decided that I didn't like the Vedic astrology wasn't resonating for me. I wanted something that was more about the psyche, more related to Jung. That felt like my roots. And so I did eventually just go out and find somebody who could teach me the astrology, and having a mentor or a definitive class to begin to study astrology is helpful. It's a hard thing to crack with independent study. And there's some YouTube channels that do a pretty good job of offering some like 101 lessons. And so there's ways to start even for free if you're not sure yet that you want to spend the money on a class.
So you would say it's something that's best practiced under someone's guidance, right?
Yeah, I definitely think so. There's a lot of theory and philosophy and understanding how to apply the archetypes. The archetypes are important in every single portion of astrology. I mean, they're the pantheon you're working with. So I do archetypal astrology, which means I focus most on the archetypes. That's where I put the most weight. Other people place it on where the angles of the planets hit, but the planets are important everywhere. So deciding, you know, which specialty you want to go into, all of that are things to consider when you're going to begin an astrology career or study.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for all these tips and advice. This was Damascena Tanis. Thank you so much for being our guest, and well, see you all in the next episode.
Thank you for having me. It was lovely to be with you guys. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Architects of Destiny podcast. Be sure to subscribe, and we will see you on the next episode.